So we are back with another update on the Sonya Massey case in Springfield, Illinois. This was the case that um, happened around on July 6th or 7th of 2024. This woman was killed by by the former deputy sheriff in Sangamon County, which is in Springfield, Illinois, named Sean Grayson. And she was 36 years old. And those of us that know the history of the case remember that she was a mentally ill woman. She was allegedly suffering from bipolar disorder as well as schizophrenia. And we essentially saw evidence of that when the records were released by Sangamon County sheriffs. However, the officer, Sean Grayson, was indicted by a grand jury on July the 17th, 2024, arraigned in Sangamon County Circuit Court on July 18th, and was remanded to custody on 3 counts of first-degree murder charges, as well as um, misconduct by a law enforcement officer. They charged him with 3 counts of first-degree murder for every shot that was fired at Sonya Massey, which hit her underneath her left eye and exited at her lower neck. The investigation by Illinois State Police, which was an independent investigation, determined that the killing was avoidable and an improper use of excessive force, in so many words. And since that time, the family has been awarded, in February of 2025, they were awarded $10 million by by Sangamon County, funds which are being paid from their reservoir rather than using tax dollars. So I want to give us this update and keep us abreast of what's going on with the case, mainly because the judge in the circuit court continues to deny media requests to have the trial broadcast to the public. Although the trial has not happened yet, the court proceedings, the media has been shut out of all of the court proceedings. And so we occasionally bring these updates to make sure that the public is aware of what's going on, of course, because of the national interest in this case. So um, basically, a lot of the interest in the case is based on the fact of police misconduct. There were issues regarding qualified immunity, which since that time has basically been done away with by the Trump administration, for what I understand. I haven't confirmed that information, but I believe that he extended or solidified qualified immunity for all law enforcement officers at this point in time. So a lot of things have changed since this killing had happened. However, the county of the Sangamon County out there in Springfield, Illinois, has taken responsibility for this unlawful killing, and continues to hold themselves accountable, even though they are not being held accountable on the federal level. There was a Department of Justice investigation that has now been closed as a result of changes that's being made at the federal level. So I think that there are some things that we need to know about what's going on, but I want to give you a timeline first of what's going on with the case to make sure that we are clear on all of the things that have been happening at this point, so that we know what's going on and what to expect to happen from this case. At this point, Sean Grayson is expected to be back in court on April the 8th. Someone uh, commented the other day about that his trial is beginning. This is not his trial. This is another pretrial hearing because he has filed for a change. He has motioned the court for a change of venue on February the 26th. So we'll get into that. Good evening, CB. Thank you so much, as always, for joining us this evening. And I want to give a shout out to all of our moderators. CB has been elevated to a managing moderator, and I appreciate him for all of his support. And as well as the others, you all are the greatest, and keep the block clean over here in our community. And then also to all of our new members, all of our new subscribers, I thank you so much. I appreciate it. We need your support, and I appreciate those of you that have extended that support to us. So let's take a look at the timelines. And I want to do this very quickly to get this completed, because we're going to have a lot more to talk about in this case. So again, although the family has been awarded $10 million, of course, in their civil suit by Sangamon County, there's still a lot going on that has very interesting implications as it relates to police violence, police misconduct, and all of those types of things that the public needs to be aware of. Again, there's a lot of changes that are being made at the federal level that will impact how we encounter police and how they are allowed to interact with the public. So this is very important. Okay, so again, the Sonya Massey was killed on July the 7th, 2024. Sean Grayson was indicted on July 17th and arraigned on first-degree murder charges and official misconduct on July 18th. He has since that time been held in custody and fighting to get out of jail. So a lot of the battle that is going on in this case has to do with his pretrial release status. And I'll get off into what has happened through the course of appeals and all of those types of things, so that we are abreast of what has happened and what is going on. He has been in custody ever since and fighting to get out. He motioned the court initially at the arraignment. His attorneys has filed motions for his pretrial release, which was denied. His first set of lawyers he terminated, I believe, based on the court records, on August the 5th, and brought in new attorneys. He then again filed another motion for relief, asking the court for, again, pretrial release, based on, at that time, he was basing his request on his biomedical conditions. It is, he allegedly has cancer, and his attorneys argued that he would not be able to be treated properly for have the proper medical care in jail. Well, they moved him because he was remanded to the Sangamon County sheriffs, but they immediately moved him, and we all saw the videos of him being booked and all of that. Well, they moved him from that jail for his own protection. Of course, him being a law enforcement officer, he would have had interactions with inmates that he had jailed and so on and so forth. So the first time they moved him was for his own protection. They moved him from Sangamon County, even though he is on record as being in custody of Sangamon County sheriffs. He has never actually been housed there. They moved him from there to Maynard County. And then as a result of this motion for relief based on his health conditions that was done on August the 9th, 2024, they moved him to Macon County I believe, presumably to make sure that he has proper medical treatment. We look at evidence being entered in, which I believe were his medical records according to court documents. Again, his motion for pretrial release was denied. And then he files a motion to appeal his pretrial detention as well on August the 9th. So the judge denied the motion for relief, again, which is him asking for to be released from custody. The judge denied that second request on August the 19th officially and approved for him to appeal his case to the 4th District Appellate Court in Springfield, Illinois. And then that notice of appeal was submitted on the 21st of August. And then we see some information as it relates to media coverage. Now, when it comes down to media coverage, again, the judge continues to deny those requests. Media outlets, likely corporate media, large media networks, continue, even as recent as February, to submit requests asking for authorization to cover the trial, and the judge is still denying it, which is problematic within itself. However, he has held this case very closely to his chest in terms of making sure that Sean Grayson is not released from jail, and we'll see how that is came into question. So we look at the pretrial hearing that was in October. It was adjourned, and his detention was continued. And then he files another motion for release again on October the 21st. And the motion or pretrial hearing was reset for December the 2nd. Now, at this point, he has already filed his appeal with the 4th District Appellate Court. The appellate court came back with their unanimous decision on November the 27th. So when they came back with their opinion, they decided or ruled that the circuit court judge was overstepping. We talked about this. I did a short video on this about 2 months ago. They ruled that the circuit court judge had overstepped because of the Pretrial Release Fairness Act. Now, this is basically the no cash bail system that has been adopted across the country. I believe about 44 states has it in place. We certainly have it now in Michigan. I think it went into effect in 2023. Now, this Pretrial Release Fairness Act basically prohibits bail decisions in terms of setting bail for defendants for any, it allows for bail to be set for defendants of any crime except for extenuating circumstances. And even then, there has to be mitigating conditions set in place if that person is found to be a threat to themselves or others. So a lot of times when we see defendants being released from jail, since this new law has been in effect since for the last couple of years, this is why. Is because this Pretrial Release Fairness Act is in place in, to my knowledge, about 44 states across the country. And so if that individual, that defendant, is found to be a threat to themselves, to an individual, or to the community at large, then the judges are required to set mitigating conditions or set conditions around the release to mitigate that threat or threats. So this is where you release inmates on tether, prohibit them from take their passports, if they're considered a flight risk, require them to report because they're being controlled by pretrial services within the court system. They don't have a PO yet because it's not, probation officers and parole officers and all of that are really post conviction managers. Pretrial services is a unit within the law enforcement departments. Again, this is pretty standard across the country, that manages defendants who are prior to adjudication. So their cases are still active. And so they would be responsible and have to report to them when they are on tether and things like that. So the courts have to find conditions to mitigate any threats. And that is what the appellate court ordered this judge to do in Sean Grayson's case. Again, this happened around July the 27th of 2024. And he was to be released. That order had to be fulfilled. And Sean Grayson was ordered to be released within 35 days. Well, when they went back to court, this pretrial hearing on December the 2nd, which was already in place, they adjourned that hearing and reset it for December the 6th. This is where the circuit court judge, Judge Cadigan, was going to make a determination of Grayson's pretrial release conditions and start the process of releasing him from custody. However, when they had this hearing, the prosecution requested or filed a motion to stay, indicating that they were going to appeal the appellate court decision with the Supreme Court. Now, this was approved. The Supreme Court did approve for the prosecution to appeal the appellate court decision. So, as a result, Grayson was to be held, that it tacked on another 35 days is essentially what happened. So he was going to be released, or the process of him being released was going to happen on December the 6th, because remember, the appellate court ordered his release on November the 27th of 2024. They gave the lower court, the circuit court, 35 days to let him go, set the conditions around any threats, and let him go. Well, the prosecution is now saying, well, we want to stay that motion and appeal it to the Supreme Court, which was approved by the Supreme Court. In other words, they said, we will hear the case. Well, that put a hold on his release for an additional 35 days, which expires somewhere around the middle of January. And the Supreme Court was not due to hear those cases until the end of January. And so what they did is they set parameters around his release to say, if we have not heard the case within the additional 35 days, then he is to be remanded to custody until we have time to, it's going to be placed on the docket, but until we have time to hear the case. And so that is why he continues to be in jail. And of course, at this point, and this is just talking about some hearings that was set and canceled and reset and all of that. And then on February the 26th, the defense filed a motion for change of venue. That is the current issue that is before the lower court at this point. Basically, the defense is saying he's not going to get a fair trial in Sangamon County. And that's essentially what it's all about. The issue with it is that all three of these court systems, nobody is on the same page. Columbus says, as it relates to media coverage, do you know if both attorneys agree to it, or does the judge make independent decision regarding cameras in the courtroom? Well, what happened is that, and that's a good question, because he did ask, after he had denied media coverage for about 3 or 4 times, he did ask for the opinions of both parties, the prosecution and the defense. And from court records, to my understanding, the defense was the only one who turned in a brief, because he required them to write briefs on their opinion about having media coverage. And to my understanding, the defense again was the only one who turned in their opinion. So we know the defense probably doesn't want media coverage, and so he's just continued to deny him. But again, we don't know the specifics of anything because we can't see anything. But yeah, he did ask the attorneys for their opinions. He had already denied requests like 3 or 4 times before and then he finally did ask them, because the requests continue to come in, and they still continue to come in, even though he's denied it at this point at least 6 times. So back to the case. So again, where we are at this point is the motion for change of venue. That is the thing that is on the table. It was scheduled to be heard on March the 24th last week, but that hearing was adjourned and reset to, April the 8th at 1:30 p.m. And that is what is being heard on next week. Now, I will post all of that information that you just saw on our community wall, so that you guys can review those dates and take a look at it and see what's going on with the case. But I just wanted to make it clear that he is not going to trial on April the 8th. They are going to hear arguments regarding a motion, the defense's motion for a change of venue. They want to have the case moved to another county because the prosecution is basically giving them a run for their money in terms of letting him out of jail. The prosecution is really, really fighting for this family to keep him in custody. And that is what's going on. And again, like I said, between the 3 court systems out there in Illinois, they only have a 3-tier system: the circuit court, appellate court, and Supreme Court. And between those 3 levels of not levels of government, but those 3 levels of the judicial system out there, everybody's, well, the appellate court had a different ruling in terms of their opinions as to whether or not he should be released, and basically they said that the lower court is in error, again, because this pretrial release Fairness Act. Now, there's also something called the Safety Act, which the prosecution is arguing before the Supreme Court. The Safety Act is actually encompassed in the Pretrial Release Fairness Act, but it is geared towards the protection of individual victims and things like that, and the public. It is concerned with that particular piece of it. However, all of it falls under the Fairness Act, so the Release Fairness Act. So it's very interesting, all of it that is going on. Now, let's talk about some of the other things that has been going on with the case. Again, like I said, the Department of Justice has concluded its investigation. However, they did come into an agreement, memorandum of understanding called a MOU, for certain things to be implemented into the Sangamon County Police Department. They have a lot of issues regarding discriminatory practices. There's also questions as to their hiring practices. Apparently, Sean Grayson is not the only case where they have an issue with not doing thorough background investigations of their potential hirees before they offer them employment. And there's also some other unexplained or unjustified killings of citizens by that sheriff's department besides Sonya Massey. And so, and we'll talk about that in a second. CB says that's the trend now for high profile cases. No camera in the courtroom and change the venue. Yes, like par for the courts. So yeah, this is an issue. So the DOJ did come set up a memorandum of understanding with the Sangamon County Police Department, and we'll talk about some of the other cases that's involved with that. There's no federal charges that were ever filed in this case, so there's no federal trial or anything like that. Some of the other cases that we look at, like Tyree Nichols and all of that, had both federal and state charges. There's no federal charges in the Sean Grayson case. He's only facing state charges. The appellate court, of course, did order his release on November the 27th. However, the Supreme Court did stay that mandate, and until they are able to hear the prosecution's arguments, which were approved to be heard before the Supreme Court to determine if the appellate court made the right decision to have him released. So the case is now pending a Supreme Court review. Civil liability, again, we talked about the fact that the family has been awarded the $10 million by Sangamon County in a wrongful death suit. Civil actions, there were some protests that went on last summer. There has been nothing else since that time. And the legislative advocacy surrounding this case, or that was being promoted by Ben Crump, the civil rights attorney that is representing the family, is the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. Now, I've covered this act on this channel during the Derek Chauvin trial, the original Derek Chauvin trial, not the appeal stuff that's going on. But essentially, the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act was approved in the House twice, never made it to the Senate floor. It was crushed before it got to the Senate floor. So Ben Crump was advocating for that legislation to be represented to Congress to possibly get it passed. However, again, lots of changes going on the federal level. And besides, one of the issues that I had with the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act is that qualified immunity was never in there. It was never even addressed in the bill. It talked about a whole lot of other things, one of which is a database, but of rogue police officers, but it never covered qualified immunity anyway. Neither did it cover the outlawing or banishment of the knee asphyxiation maneuver. That is the method or mode that was used by Derek Chauvin when he killed George Floyd. They call it prone asphyxiation, and there's another term, I can't think of it right now. However, that is technically, in some departments, a legal police maneuver. However, at some point, you can't do it for 9 minutes. That's number one. But at some point, you have to put the person on the side and allow them to catch their breath. But the whole point is to keep them, and it's generally done in situations where a person is not cooperating, resisting, and all of that. The other issue was with the Derek Chauvin conviction, or the reason why he was convicted, is because They already had him in handcuffs and in the back of the car when they pulled him out to asphyxiate him. Then held down his legs and all of that stuff, and then kept him in that position for 9 minutes, and all of that. So it was a cruel and unusual punishment, if you will, type of situation that led to his ultimate conviction. However, the maneuver itself is a legal police maneuver in some states, but also the Department of Justice has been asking police department, law enforcement agencies to ban that maneuver for years, because their studies were showing there was too many deaths, and things like that as a result of it. So there was all kinds of investigations and studies and whatever. And the Department of Justice asked law enforcement agencies to stop using that maneuver back in the early 2000s, if I remember correctly. I would have to go back and look at some of the records that I pulled at that time. But they've been asking them to get rid of that stuff for years. So, however, this is what Ben Crump, in terms of legislative advocacy, vowed to fight for as it relates of the Sonya Massey killing. Now, the community also responded by developing in Sangamon County a citizens advocacy group called the Massey Commission. And again, as I said, they established the commission because there are other deaths by Sangamon County deputies, not all Black people either, that were wrongful deaths. Fortunately, in the Sonya Massey case, there probably will more than likely be a conviction, and they were also financially compensated for the crime. In other cases, they were not. And so, because the department itself has some issues, the citizens of that county did start a citizen advocacy group called the Massey Commission that is going to evaluate all of these cases, look at the numbers, look at the data, or develop some data and come up with strategies. Now, this group convened in September of 24, and they are scheduled to conclude within 12 months, not an unspecified date, within 12 months, with their findings and solutions. Okay, so we'll be watching that as well. The last thing is the systemic response to the Sonya Massey killing. Essentially, Senator Doris Turner, Democrat of Illinois, and Representative Justin Slaughter, Democrat of Chicago, supported and sponsored two bills, Senate Bill 1953 and 1954. 1953 will require a comprehensive review of all law enforcement officers prior to hire or offering them a law enforcement position. Senate Bill 1954 would allow citizens to recall elected officials countywide. And so those are two. And again, the Senate Bill 1953 would also or require the use of a database. And there's some sort of database that is already in place where law enforcement agencies can track officers who are either being terminated for various reasons from other departments in other states and other, even in Sean Grayson's case, he was able to go through 6 departments in 4 years right there in the same state. He didn't even move to another state. Speaking of the Thais Nichols case, didn't you say no cameras in the for that case too? No, they have a media pool. They have a media pool for the state trial. Of course, the federal trial, they did not allow cameras for any federal trials, and that needs to change. But that's a whole nother uh, uh, advocacy that's going on to bring cameras into federal courts. But of course, we know uh, no one can record federal trial, but the state trial, yes, it will be televised in Tyree Nichols' case, but again by media pool. So the corporate media will have has access and will release footage to uh, other networks, um, but the trial will be broadcast. Yes. So again, this is everything that is going on there. In what I was saying about the Senate Bill 1953 is that uh, the there is a database, excuse me, that is currently in use that can track officers. I think that it is not a complete system or a totally effective system, but there is something that is already in place where officers can be tracked when they are released from other law departments for whatever reason, or are moving in and out through these different departments, so that the next department will be able to pull up their records, pull up their history before they offer them employment with a new department. Because you got these, again, rogue officers who generally move around a lot because they're not, and this is part of the argument from the prosecution in terms of having Sean Grayson released from jail now, based on the fact that he is a threat to probably to the Massey family, and to the community as well, is because he didn't even obey the orders of his superiors to keep his job in all of these departments that he kept getting fired from. How do we expect him to follow court orders? Um, he's already proven that he is uh, non-compliant, you know, in other situations. In terms of authority, he has an issue with authority. We even heard a tape of a former police chief chewing him out about not following his orders, not telling the truth, lying on his police reports, and all of that stuff. So, this guy essentially does not have the character to be trusted, is essentially what he's saying. But again, you also have the Safety Act, which is designed to protect citizens and victims from perpetrators, in terms of make in the decision process of releasing them from custody under the Pretrial Release Fairness Act. So again, I hope that I made this easy for you guys to follow. I'm not sure. It's a lot of information. A lot of people have kind of fallen off from their interest in the case, but I like to put these updates up so that there is record of what is going on with the case. Because again, these cases have implications in terms of public safety. That is the issue. And we have to look at the precedent that these one case will set for others. And so this is why these cases are important. And it is important that we not only know what's going on with the case, but also understand the legal process, the judicial process, and all of that, and what these laws are that are in place that will affect how the community is protected should there be an issue in our interactions with police officers. That is the issue. Again, I will post these update logs on the community wall so that you guys can review them at your leisure and hopefully be able to print them out. I don't know if you guys have to let me know if you can print them out. Yes, what's been going on? Yeah, we need to know what's going on. And again, under the Trump administration, there's going to be a lot of changes. There's already been a lot of changes at the federal level. I understand that they are pardoning Derek Chauvin. If it hasn't happened already, I've got to go and look and see what happened with that. But it's problematic for police officers to be killing citizens. Period. I don't care who it is. This is not what they're there for. They're there to protect and serve, and so on and so forth. So police officers should not be killing citizens. Period. Now, in the process of mutual combat or suspect resistance and all of that stuff, things happen. And then the safety of officers is paramount. However, if there is no threat, the citizens should be apprehended, detained, placed in custody, and transported without incident. And that is what should have they should have never been in Sonya Massey's house, period. She called about a prowler outside. There was no reason for them to go in that home. But that's another discussion, and that we've actually had many times. So again, we will continue to watch and bring you these updates as we come across them. Those of you that are joining us tonight, there's a few folks in here. Please take a moment to hit the thumbs up to help us in the algorithm to move the video along, to make sure others have the opportunity to get this updated information. And I will continue to bring you information as I receive it and make sure that you guys have it and so that we know what's happening. And again, I'm hoping that at some point that the judge will make a decision, change his mind about allowing media coverage once the trial actually happens. But as it stands right now, Grayson is not on trial. He's not going to trial on April the 8th. It is another motion hearing to discuss, or for the judge to make a decision on a change of venue. So, of course, we'll be back probably sometime next week to talk about that and let you guys know what's going on with it. Everybody have a good night. I will see you soon. I believe Kelly Bryan is in court on April the 15th is our next court hearing, but we do have some things that we need to discuss on her case as well. And I will get that information to you over the next day or two. I'm trying to get another trial and make it available on the channel this week. And so I will keep you guys posted on that as well. Hopefully I'll have information by morning to make that trial available to you guys for the Karen Reed trial on the channel that starts tomorrow morning. But check the community wall. That is where I generally post all of the updates. And you guys have a good evening. I will talk to you soon. Thank you so much for joining me once again, and I'll talk to you guys later. Enjoy more of our videos on the Community Advocate Network channel, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. If you would like to advertise your service, special announcement, or event, you may contact us at the Community Advocate Network at gmail.com. For community resources or services, visit our website at www.canmichigan.com.